been kind of seeing a lot of meditation teachers who are, recording their talks or just live streaming on social media and that sort of thing. And it doesn't really help with my own apprehension about filming and recording talks. But I've been seeing these guys, and they're giving basic instruction and talking about the Dharma and practice and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, I that's what I do. There shouldn't be a lot of uneasiness around this, but for some reason, I think it's just that whole thing of like, oh wow, here it is recorded for posterity, and 20 years from now, if I'm still kicking, what's it going to be like to look back on that? But that's just that. It's like we do our best in this moment, and and we can't. It's unfair for us to compare our present self with our past self, because our past self was doing the best that they could with what they knew and what they had. And so when we get lost in these kind of like what if scenarios or complaints, or I should have done this better, or whatever it could be, it's really that we're lost in delusion in that we are comparing this present idea of who we believe ourselves to be with a past idea of who we believed ourselves to be. And the thing that I have found to be so helpful is that just to remind yourself that at any given point in your life, you're doing the best that you could possibly do with what you had at that time. It could be no other way. It's not like, oh, I could have done things better. It's like, no, you could only do things the way you did them. And that was your best. I found that to be really helpful. Today I shared this article on American Theravada Buddhism. And I just some of the things out of the article that I felt really, was really nice. In North America, Theravada is often seen as focusing on meditation. In truth, meditation is one aspect of the tradition, which also includes important components such as the cultivation of generosity, alongside moral precepts and ethical training. Hopefully, those of you who come here regularly get that message very clearly from myself and the other teachers that teach here. I think a lot of times people will come here and they're like, oh gosh, no, not another talk on the precepts or another talk on, these kind of fundamental aspects. And we give these talks because they are fundamental aspects. You're not going to progress in your meditation practice if you are not following the precepts. If you don't have that ethical foundation, you're not going to progress in your meditation practice. And to sum up the ethical foundations, it's practicing in a way that is non-harming. There's a lot to it, but next bullet point listed here, an understanding of karma and its laws. And this is something that I get into almost every time I teach, is the cause and effect relationship. That the relative aspect of our practice is that the things we do and say have consequences. And that we really should be taking great care in how we conduct ourselves and how we interact with others. Study of the Pali Canon and its commentaries and sub-commentaries. And this is something that all of the MOI teachers are engaged in. We're all studying the suttas. We're all studying, the Dharma from trusted sources, trusted scholars. And oftentimes you'll see the teachers teaching from these suttas directly. They'll mention a particular story or a simile as presented in the Buddha's teachings, and then kind of share that and talk about it and relate it back, oftentimes relating it back to ethical conduct. A range of community service, including outreach and social welfare programs. And again, that's what MOI does. How cool is that? All the outreach work that MOI does. Our newest outreach work right now is with the Douglas County Corrections Facility. And that's huge for us. It's been something that I've wanted to get in place ever since I started MOI, and we finally established a way to make that possible. We have a donor that's supporting the effort, and we've got teachers that go to the correction facility every Tuesday. A group of our teachers work with the male population, and other teachers of our work with the female population. And that's something that everyone's really benefiting from. The people who participate in the program, and of course our teachers, benefiting from the interaction with the people who are incarcerated. Support for immigrants and refugees, the refugee community. I can't say that we have any particular program that's directly impacting with that, but we have discussed the possibility of supporting. And when I say this, we have discussed with other nonprofits who directly benefit the refugee community. And we've discussed with them the possibility of MOI offering mindfulness classes to that community. And, one of the times I thought something was really going to kind of come to fruition out of some planning that was being done. But it all kind of comes back on, sometimes there needs to be a translator and that sort of thing. So it's something that we are probably still going to work towards in time. And again, this is in this article. This is just this person's probably their list off the top of their head as they're writing this article, because the next bullet point says, and much more. But again, it's just he's saying in North America, Theravada is often seen as focused on meditation. In truth, meditation is one aspect of the tradition, which also includes all these other things. And I'm just, for myself, I'm just so grateful to the community, the Insight Meditation community, for all the support I've received. My mentor and my teacher encouraging me to deepen my practice so that I can be a better friend to people who are exploring this practice. And the guidance that I've been given from these teachers that I have a relationship with, it's never been harsh or critical kind of judgment. And I've experienced that from other people who are involved in the Dharma. And that's the thing that I found so remarkable is with the Insight community, these are people that really embody the Dharma. Their guidance comes through maybe in a strong way, but it's still marked by caring and support, nurturing, love, as opposed to maybe this kind of a judgmental thing of you're not doing it right and you shouldn't be doing it. And that just makes so much more sense to me. So I'm really grateful that the most profound lessons that I've been given from my interaction with these teachers is the way they just radiate kindness and compassion. To me, that is that's the truth of their practice. That their practice is lived, not just something that they talk about, read about, repeat, prescribe. It's something that they live. To me, that's rare, because there's a lot of things being prescribed to people. And when you meet somebody who actually lives what they're encouraging you to explore for yourself, so many times when I'm sharing this practice with other people, a lot of people, they have kids of their own, or they work in situations where they're interacting with kids, like as teachers and faculty of schools, that sort of thing. And they say, well, how can we share this with the kids? Because we know these kids will really benefit from all of these mindfulness exercises. And my encouragement is always that they practice it themselves, that it's not just something that they prescribe, but that they practice it themselves, because it's through our good example that the best lessons are learned. So, I mean, if you want to impart something to a young person, you show them through your action that it's important to you. You know, you don't sit there and try to coerce them into meditating with you. You get up every morning and you meditate, so they see you. You know, you don't say, okay, I'm going to go away and you don't disturb me. This practice is about, making friends with disturbance, meeting disturbance, and having a peace that is able to hold space in that disturbance. So if your cat's running around, or your kids come into the room, or the phone rings, or someone decides they want to watch TV right when you're meditating in the room next door, that's part of your practice. That's the world, and you're meeting it. And when your kids see that, oh, this is dad, this is mom, and they do this, and they don't sacrifice this. This is something that they do, and it benefits them, and it benefits us. They can see how it plays out. Then it becomes something important. And if they're your kids, chances are they're going to rebel against it until they get to that age where they can truly appreciate it, and then maybe they'll explore it for themselves. Not as something like, okay, you've got to do this, That might work for piano lessons, but I don't think it's necessarily the right way to go about encouraging a young kid to start exploring awareness. So really what I was going to talk about tonight was around investigation. Investigation. And it seems to me that we have our kind of definition of what investigation is. And that definition kind of confuses people when they start bringing that kind of traditional definition of investigation to their meditation practice. They start like, okay, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to understand why things are the way they are, and I'm going to go through my personal history and really figure out my psychology, and then everything will be okay. And that's not what investigation is in this practice. And the best way that I can really make the distinction, or a way that the distinction can be made that helps you kind of come to your own understanding, is that it's not so much about the why, it's about what. So what's happening in this moment? Not why is this happening in this moment? And when somebody's really caught up in anxiety or stress, that's the question they're asking themselves. And if you encourage them to investigate their experience, they're asking, why is this happening? What have I done? Why me? Why is this happening? Whose fault is this, kind of thing? Oftentimes, I mean, that's been my own experience when feeling something really unpleasant, and the question of why is what's at the fore of the mind. I'm asking why, who has done this to me? Who has forsaken me? Why is this happening to me? I think for a meditator, investigating the state of the mind, investigating experience, the question is, what is happening? What is this in this moment? And that what question is leading you to the direct experience, leading to the direct intuitive experience in that moment. Not your thoughts about what's happening. Not to try to figure something out or understand it in that way. It's more an intuitive understanding. And out of that, remarkably, the why usually shows up. You take the time to be still with yourself and just like, okay, what's going on in the body? What's going on in the mind? What's going on in the heart? Not why do I feel stressed? Why do I feel anxious? It's what's happening here. And then out of that question of what's happening, you start to see the cause. You start to see primarily, you see the suffering. The first noble truth. You see, oh, here's the suffering. This is unpleasant. This is painful, And then you start to recognize the cause. Oh, things aren't the way I want them to be. And I'm tying myself into knots. I want more of this. I want less of that, all of those sort of things. And as soon as we kind of like, we jump off of the feeling tone into the story, we jump off of the feeling tone of the experience being pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and we fall into the story, the mind's proliferations. And that's where we start to see how, our relationship to pleasant turns into greed, and our relationship to unpleasant turns into aversion. We start creating a lot of suffering for ourselves out of all of that craving to have it our way, and an inability to, or not necessarily an inability, but more like a kind of a denial to see how it actually is. And seeing how things actually are, it is acceptance, but it's also a little more than acceptance. Sometimes it's surrender. Surrendering to how things are, because we might accept how things are, but then there's like, okay, I can accept that this is how it is, but how do I let go of wanting it to be different? And so I think that's another area that's interesting to explore in the mind is, what's this? Is there a difference between acceptance and surrender? And then, throw in some more. Is there a difference between acceptance, surrender, and letting go, or letting be? What's it feel like in the body? What's, going back to that question of what is it? What's it like? How is it now? Asking those sort of questions, feeling it in the body. So we're feeling it in the mind and in the heart. That's really kind of looking at the 6 sense doors, mind, touch, sight, smell, hearing, and taste. These are the doors from which we can kind of like, what's going on now? And so we see how, okay, I'm sitting here, I'm meditating, and there's some discomfort in the body, and I don't like it. So what's going on? Sensation. Pain, I don't like it. There's that aversion. There's that quality of suffering in the causes, the craving for it to be different than it is. And it's never just about mindfulness. What I'm talking about, this is the mindfulness that helps us see how things are. It's not just mindfulness, it's the discernment. And how do I skillfully relate to this? Sometimes the skillful means is to adjust, to move. Move fully aware of how you're relating to that sensation. Move with awareness. Move understanding craving and suffering inherent in that whole relationship. Don't just force yourself to sit there, because sometimes you might just be practicing suffering. You're not practicing liberation, you're practicing suffering. So sometimes you need to move. You need to take care of yourself, show yourself that compassion. But then, you can ask yourself what's going on, and then you afford yourself you afford yourself this opportunity to begin to understand, to see suffering, to see the cause of the suffering, that craving, and to begin to soften around it, to begin to afford yourself this time to understand, which means that, okay, here I am, I'm practicing fortitude, I'm practicing being steadfast, giving myself this opportunity to understand suffering, to understand the cause of suffering. Here I am, being patient, being steadfast, having that determination to hold that space there. And then things change. It doesn't mean that what you're observing is going to go away. It means that things are going to change. Might get harder. A lot of times people think, okay, I'm going to be mindful and I'm going to see that things are changing, and that means it's going to go away and get better. No, it could just mean that you're going to sit there and you're going to see change, and that's liberating. The unpleasant might abide for your entire sitting practice. The unpleasantness of, the knee or the back that's aching, And so you're with it and you're watching it, but you can see that change, and that's liberating. That's an insight. Seeing that characteristic of change, seeing that, okay, this is not within my control. This isn't something that's ultimately going to satisfy. It's ungovernable. It's changing from moment to moment, and I'm not the one making all that happen. Then you begin to see the selfless nature of it, and then you start to not be so identified with it. You see the empty and selfless nature of this whatever is being experienced. So you see suffering, you see the cause of suffering, you see the suffering come to an end. Everything arises and passes away. Whatever has the nature to arise will also pass away. And then you understand, if we're talking about the Four Noble Truths, then you understand, okay, there's a way of practicing all of this. There's a way of coming to a deeper understanding that really, that when I afford myself this opportunity to get on my cushion and see how things actually are, that directly translates into, so many other ways that I go about my life. All of my other interactions. It's all relationship. The way I relate to myself, the way I relate to this body, the way I relate to this heart, this mind, is the same way that I relate to my Uber driver, my whatever, my bank teller, my car, my possessions, my house. Developing that wise heart here in this moment and taking those lessons learned into your life to where you are of benefit to not only yourself but others. So it's awesome. And how wonderful to be able to practice this stuff, to be able to come to an intimate relationship with yourself, to cultivate self-knowledge, to understand the mind. Man, because there's so much suffering when you don't understand the mind. And you might have some understanding and still find yourself suffering in different patterns, different delusions, things that are so deeply rooted that you just haven't seen the truth yet. Keep practicing. Understand the value of practice. It's why we're always encouraging you and everyone that comes here to practice. Put in your time. It doesn't mean you have to sit on a cushion. It might mean that you're lying down. It might mean that you're taking 5 minutes in your car before you go on to the next thing. But take time to see what's happening, what's actually going on, how the mind is in relationship to experience. Physical experience, emotional experience, interpersonal experience. So many wonderful opportunities to come to a deeper understanding. And it's this understanding, it's this wisdom that frees the mind. And it's important to understand that, insights and wisdom, impermanent, changing. The Buddha said that, when we practice, wisdom is strengthened. And if we don't practice, wisdom wanes. There's tons of insights that you'll have that, will come and go. The mindfulness you're experiencing now will come and go. And when you're practicing, you see that, okay, there's no one behind it. I don't have to take it all personally, There's no one being mindful. There's no one being a pain in the ass. But yet, being a pain in the ass is what has arisen. And in this moment, it's my responsibility. How am I going to be with that? So, what about fear?
Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of dying.
So for me, that's fear of those things, fear of rejection, fear of dying. Fear. So when I've explored fear, one of the things that I really kind of found helpful was that there is a difference between fright and fear. Fright is more this kind of biological thing that saves us. It tells us what's appropriate, an appropriate way to respond to being startled is to jump. That's fright, serves a purpose. Fear, to me, a lot of times it's more this psychological thing. It's this thing that the mind is creating in relationship to certain conditions. Sometimes I encourage students to practice meditation in their dark basement with all the lights off, because they can go into their dark basement prepared. Okay, I'm going to my basement to meet fear, because there's a really good chance that fear is going to arise. I'm an American. I've seen all the horror movies. I've been conditioned to think that there's something scary in the basement, even though I walk down in the basement and there's nobody down there. There's nothing down there. But yet I take my seat and I sit. And before I know it, I hear something, and it could be completely irrational, where maybe I'm thinking, okay, my house was built on an Indian burial ground and now ghosts are going to come and get their revenge. That old story from Poltergeist. Or it could be something like, okay, I'm sitting in here and, a spider could come up and bite me. That's likely. I'm sitting in a dark basement. And so the mind will take this and start creating this quality of fear in the mind. And so, again, it's not just mindfulness, it's discernment. Maybe there are spiders. Maybe you need to take care and get out of there. But it's practicing with mindful awareness of fear. And so, like everything that we're experiencing, we can be present with it and bring awareness to it. And that's it. You just be patient with it, bring patience, well, not patience, but being present and aware. And when we are present and aware, wholesome states of mind flourish and unwholesome states of mind wane. It's just simply being aware and present and observing. How is it? What's happening here? What is this? What is this? And you start to see that, okay, this fear is dependent upon thoughts. This fear is dependent upon, this anxiety is wrapped up in sensation in the body, emotion, thoughts, memory. You start to see all the moving parts. And when you bring the mindful awareness to fear itself, you see that the fear is changing. It's made up of changing parts, and it itself is changing. It's insubstantial. It's not permanent. Nothing to get attached to, because the fear that was there has already become something else. It's changing from moment to moment. And when you have that awareness and can see that changing nature, the mind is naturally free. It takes practice. And that's why sometimes, practice is so helpful, because there's going to be plenty of times in life where we're not prepared to meet fear. And it just comes. And it can be really overwhelming. The suffering in that can overwhelm the mindfulness very easily. That's why I say, sometimes, we can take our practice into situations so that we're prepared to meet it. I've got a friend of mine who is a veteran, and due to some of his conditioning, he has a really pronounced fear of stepping out of the shower into the cold air. When he's in the shower, he's warm, but stepping out of the shower and meeting that coolness, there's a quality of anxiety that comes up with that. And he just simply practiced being with that anxiety. Not practicing the anxiety, but practicing being aware of it, seeing it, not participating in it, but being the observer of it, just meeting it, mindfully meeting it. And it slowly started to unravel that for him. It slowly started to decondition his attachment to that story, to that, this is deeply rooted stuff, powerful conditioning that is connected to the sensation of all of that and the emotions wrapped up in it. But he's just simply been present to it and aware and seen all of it. And slowly it started to recondition the mind to where he's not in resistance to it, not activating it, not trying to not feeding energy into it by suppressing it and all of those sort of things. And he started to find a way of being with it in a softer, lighter way, still working with it. So I'm kind of all over the place, but then there's mindfulness of death. Maranasati is a practice where you are practicing bringing awareness to the fact of your mortality, being mindful that that we're all aging, and that we're all eventually going to experience illness and sickness, and that we're all eventually going to pass away, and that everyone that we care for is going to pass away, and that ultimately we are the heirs to our actions, that our happiness and our unhappiness is dependent upon our actions. And this is a way that we can practice bringing awareness to that truth. And the more presence and awareness you can bring to that, it's not a morbid pursuit, it's a liberating pursuit. A lot of joy comes out of that. You start to appreciate each and every moment of life because you recognize how valuable it is. For me, I remember being kind of almost surprised at having an affection for even unpleasant experience, because I was so clearly recognizing, like, wow, this is a once in a lifetime event. This is painful, this is unpleasant, but this is my life. And this is it. And now it's gone. There's a lot of joy that comes out of, a willingness to embrace your mortality. It helps you kind of shift attention away from trivia, frivolous pursuits, and connect more deeply to what's important. There's so many of these stories about people in hospice, and their regrets are reflective upon wishing they had spent more time cultivating relationships rather than accumulating things and accomplishments and success. It's more like, I wish I'd spent more time enjoying the moments of my life and the people in it. So it's the challenge in practice that when we are like facing something like an addiction, we might know, okay, yeah, I can be mindful. I know all about mindfulness. But then actually meeting that craving long enough so that you can see that, oh, this is pain, this is suffering. Even though that craving might lead to something pleasant, a pleasant state, can I meet the craving long enough to experience, oh, this is suffering? Then it's not so much about where it goes, whether it leads to something pleasant or something unpleasant. It's about recognizing, like, oh, in this moment, this is pain, this is suffering, this is craving, this is the cause of suffering. And then bringing mindful awareness to that itself, having the fortitude to be with it, to see it, and then the mind's liberated when you can actually see the truth of it. That craving isn't something permanent. It's not something you have to act upon. So you might know all of that. You may have even had some success practicing all of that. But then there's times where that craving shows up and you just go right back into it because you're too lost in the ignorance, too lost in the delusion of how pleasant the thing is that you're leading to, or how scary the unpleasant thing is that you're trying to retreat from. So you have some successes. There's things where you can be mindful and boom, instantly, you're just enlightened. And suddenly, the mind's free and you never have a worry or a care about whatever that thing might be again. Other times, there's things that we have to meet again and again and again through practice. Deeply conditioned patterns that we have to meet over and over again before we truly have a liberating understanding so that we can be in relationship to it without suffering. You can enjoy the pleasant thing and not suffer. A lot of times we can't. We can't be in relationship with the pleasant thing without suffering. And that's where we practice. We practice bringing mindful attention to those areas. And so everything I've said is also, this is how you can work with a relationship with your own mortality, when you're just sitting there minding your own business and something kind of comes up as a condition or a causative condition that brings up that fear of someday I'm going to die, and feeling that anxiety and all that fear well up and how intensely it can grip you. It's like, okay, can I skillfully be with this? Can I show myself compassion, but yet also meet this experience with mindfulness? Can I meet this experience with kindness and care for myself? And be mindful and see, how is this? What is this? Not why is this? Why am I afraid about dying? You know, nobody else is talking about this. Nobody else is afraid of dying, but why am I afraid of dying? That's not going to necessarily free the mind. Asking the question, what is going on, is going to give you the information that you need to be mindful and discerning and find that liberating truth in relationship to it. You know, in a very ultimate way, we're dying moment by moment. We're being born and we're dying in each moment. This moment passes away. The next moment passes away. Who I believe myself to be in this very moment has already died and gone away. That's a truth. And if we can see it, if we can practice seeing that, then that's going to be reassuring to these bigger challenges. It's like I've said, you're sitting on your meditation cushion, and you're in this relationship with an itch that is just driving you crazy. The skill you develop in being in that relationship mindfully translates directly to, being in relationship with somebody who is difficult to be around. Here I am being with a difficult itch. Now here I am being with a difficult coworker. The skill I develop in being with that itch is the same skill I need in order to be in this situation. Yeah, I could scratch both, I could scratch the itch, or I could leave the situation with a coworker and face the consequences of, hey, why did you walk out on that meeting? Hey, why did you walk out of my office when I was scolding you about taking long lunches? Oh, I couldn't handle it. There will be consequences for that. And so, it's developing a fortitude where you can be with difficulty. And ultimately, it's a developing the fortitude so that you can be with what's not difficult, but on the other end of the spectrum, what's pleasant. Can I be with what's pleasant without clinging to it, without chasing it, without trying to get that hit of pleasant again and again, thinking that, oh, this will be the one, this will be the last one, this will be the best one, and then I'll be able to let it go. Because we tell ourselves that story over and over again. This will be the last time I'll get this pleasant thing in my system, and then I'll be able to let it go. And that's, if we're mindful, we'll see that as a valuable insight. Okay, this is ultimately unsatisfying. It can't ultimately satisfy us because the nature of everything is to change. So we see the impermanent nature of things. We see the dukkha of it. We see that it's ultimately unsatisfying, uncontrollable, and we see the empty nature of it, the selfless nature. And the more we do this, the more we begin to understand. We find that liberating understanding. And this kind of understanding that I'm talking about is, like I've mentioned before, it's where we no longer see the snake on the path. It's that we now recognize a discarded rope. We can never see the discarded rope in a way that, okay, I'm afraid of that snake. The fear doesn't arise. That fear in that relationship has been uprooted through the cultivation of understanding. When we afford ourselves the opportunity to meet the snake and see the truth that it is a rope, we can't see it as a snake anymore. We can imagine it as a snake, but that fear is not going to arise in the mind. It's been uprooted. The aversion's no longer there because the understanding the wisdom has taken the place of ignorance. And the whole relationship changes. So what we're practicing is having that insight with all things. And if there's something painful going on in your life, then that's what you're practicing. You're practicing bringing mindful awareness presence, self-compassion, as much skill as you can, you're bringing that to that relationship. And if it's a fear of death, then that's the snake on the path that you're trying to meet, to see that it's actually a rope. And now this can get confusing, right? It's like, okay, the idea of death is a snake. Okay, does that make... No, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the fear of death. Death isn't the problem. It's the fear of death. And the fear of death isn't the problem because that's just going on in the mind. What you're trying to see is that there is... that fear in the mind is just mind-made. And that's where the snake turns into a rope. It's mind-made. It's made up out of thoughts. It's made up out of conditioning. It's made up out of sensation, interplaying with the thoughts, and emotion, interplaying with the sensation and the thoughts. It's all these moving parts, all these many things changing from moment to moment, coming together in a way that creates a very convincing illusion of something permanent, fear of death. When we have this quality of being present and aware, we afford ourselves the opportunity to observe, and just through that observation, we begin to understand, we begin to see clearly what's actually going on. And we see the truth. And there might still be a fear of death, but our relationship to that fear of death has changed. Because the fear of death, it's like, okay, this is unpleasant, but my relationship to that fear, I don't suffer. It might still be unpleasant, but I'm not suffering in it. Just because we say like freedom from suffering doesn't mean that the experience of something isn't still pleasant or unpleasant. You might be free of ice cream sandwiches, but ice cream sandwiches are still experienced as pleasant. You might be fear of suffering in relationship to the idea of death, but the idea of death is still maybe unpleasant. Chances are having that kind of an insight in relationship to something like an emotion or a thought around things, it's going to change the way you're relating to it as even unpleasant or pleasant or not. It's probably going to turn into something more, it's like, yeah, the idea of death doesn't bother me anymore. It's not unpleasant. The insight, the wisdom is there to such a degree that I don't even experience the thought of death as unpleasant anymore. Whereas before, for years of my life, it has ruled my world as a very unpleasant experience. Maybe the insight has helped me recognize that it's not the idea of death that's unpleasant, it's something else that was unpleasant the whole time. Okay. Well, this is the time where we meditate. So we'll take this last 10 minutes and practice together.